Chapter 2. That's a wrap for today. Well done, everyone. Great work. A spontaneous burst of applause erupted from the assembled cast and crew. George swung his arm over my shoulder and gave me a firm congratulatory shake. "Great first day, James," said George with a beaming smile. "I have to say, I was initially a bit worried that you didn't have the experience for a gig like this, but you've really proved yourself today." "Thanks, George. Appreciate it," I said, knocking back a glass of champagne that Lucy had just thrust into my hand. Out of the corner of my eye, I saw Danny striding up to me, sporting a broad grin. "Well, considering that was your first time as a first AD, that was extraordinary," said Danny, grasping my hand and giving it a deeply ingratiating shake. "The way you ran the set today was sublime," he continued. "Not only that, but boy, what a great time we've all had. I haven't laughed so much for years." "Thanks, Danny," I said, basking in the glory. "It was a pleasure to work with all of you guys today. Great teamwork." Next up to share the love was Diane. "Well, what a fantastic start to the shoot, James. We've covered an amazing amount of ground today. As you know, I was a bit concerned that you were overstretching yourself, taking on the roles of first AD, as well as being the producer, location manager, line producer, driver, third AD, and playing one of the policemen. But, you've really pulled it off today. In all my years working in continuity, I've never experienced such a seamless first day on set." I drained the glass and took a moment to reflect on the resounding success of the day's shoot. Except I couldn't. I was feeling as chuffed as Larry, but was struggling to recall exactly why. Perhaps it was just the numbing effect of the champagne, or perhaps it was the bleeping sound that was growing annoyingly louder in my ear. "Lucy, is that your mobile?" "Is what my mobile?" said Lucy. "That beeping sound, can't you hear it?" No," she replied, looking confused. "Danny, can you hear it?" "Hear what?" said Danny. The beeping." Danny cupped his ear and cocked his head. "No, can't hear anything," he said after pausing to scan the ether for bleeping-type anomalies. "Oh, come on, guys," I said, getting exasperated and just a little bit scared. "I can't believe you can't hear it." Sod how well the shoot had gone. I had obviously contracted tinnitus, and everything would now turn to rat shit. I noticed that there was a definite pattern to the beeps. 4 short beeps, and then a gap, and then another 4 beeps, and then another gap, with each set of beeps louder than the ones before. No doubt this indicated the early stages of chronic and syphilitic tinnitus. The next stage would be the merging of the bleeps into one continuous and excruciatingly irritating tone that would send me frothing into a state of blind knuckle-munching madness. Abruptly, the beeping stopped, and I found myself sitting upright in a freezing pitch-black room. I rapidly became aware of the dull, luminous face of my up-ended alarm clock, and 3 things dawned on me in quick succession. Firstly, I didn't have tinnitus. Hurrah! Secondly, my gloriously successful first day on the shoot was merely the fabrication of a mischievous, vodka-addled and sleep-deprived mind. Boo! And lastly, it was 6:30 a.m., which meant I was already 15 minutes behind schedule on the morning of D-Day. Shit, ass tit shit. A tightly packed ball of nerves began to ferment in my stomach as I clumsily leapt around the room like a special needs Labrador puppy. Having rediscovered my clothes, computer and various bits of paperwork, I stumbled down to the courtyard and made my way over to the people carrier. Mr. Frosty, the fucker, had entombed the car with ice, and so I was forced to spend the next few minutes chipping away at the windscreen with my nectar card. I finally pulled away from my digs and hurtled up the drive, a good 25 minutes behind schedule. I took a deep breath in an attempt to quell my rising anxiety levels and flipped open my production schedule to check the morning's pickups. The schedule told me 3 actors and 4 crew billeted in 5 different locations. As I strained to see out of the smeared windscreen, I cursed myself for not having booked everyone into the local hotel. Of course, my darling, precious budget hadn't allowed me such a luxury, and so here I was, at 7 a.m, hungover and barely compos mentis, struggling to remember where everyone was. Right, Tom, it says here that he's at the old vicarage on the corner of Mill Road and Steeple Lane, I muttered to myself while squinting at some scrawled instructions on the B&B list. Mill Road, where the fuck's that then? Is that a B road? I said, while attempting to cross-reference the instructions with a hopelessly large-scale map of the area. If it is, then why isn't the sodding road number on the sodding arsewipe instructions then? A sat-nav at this point would have been handy. Hadn't even crossed my mind. We were filming in just the one location, so why on earth would I have thought of that? Still, as I careered around bend after bend, I kicked myself for overlooking this one little detail. Suddenly there was the unmistakable thud of something small and squashable ricocheting off the bonnet. Instinctively I brought the car to a halt, grabbed a torch and got out to examine what I had hit. I shone the torch around, expecting to find mangled bits of a rabbit, but to no avail. The only evidence of the impact being a big, bloody dent on the front bumper, which pleased me no end. Oh, great, thanks for buggering up the bumper, thumper. Barely an hour into day one, and I was not only late and lost, but had already damaged the hire car. Brilliant. I was about to get back into the vehicle when I noticed a small road leading off to the right. At the top of the road, the torch picked out the sign, Steeple Lane. What was even more exciting was another smaller sign underneath saying, The Old Vicarage B&B, 1 mile. Perhaps the patron saint of film producers had taken pity on me and intervened by way of the bringing together of Bunny and Bumper. At a guess, probably St. Clare of Assisi, a saint renowned for being both pathologically optimistic and worryingly keen on martyrdom. At any rate, I was relieved to get a break. I jumped back into the car and sped off towards the B&B and Tom. Morning. Sorry I'm late, I apologised as Tom clambered into the back of the MPV. That's all right, James, said Tom. Great to see you. Sleep well? I inquired as we sped off to our next destination, wherever the fuck that was. Not bad, thanks. How about you? Bit rubbish, unfortunately, I said. Didn't get to sleep until about 2, and even then slept only fitfully. I'm not surprised, said Tom, giving my shoulder an encouraging pat. I imagine you've been looking forward to this day for quite a while now. I liked Tom. He exuded empathy and warmth by the bucket load. He was also preternaturally calm, a quality that I instantly envied. As we rattled down the country lanes, I had this overwhelming desire to open up to him and confess just how crushingly ill-equipped I felt to do my various jobs. Yes, I had been looking forward to the shoot, but now, with its arrival, I felt a strange and creeping sense of foreboding. So, best not ask Tom for a hug this early on in the shoot. I might just blub. Even though my faculties were still thawing out, I was alert enough to realise the importance of maintaining at least a veneer of confidence in front of the troops. To be able to perform well, actors need to believe that those around them know what they're doing. If that belief evaporates, then morale can quickly nosedive. Take the following exchange, for example. James, for the car shot, will you be using a stunt double? I glanced over to see Tom studying the following on that morning's call sheet. Scene 3, page 1. Exterior, country lane. Story synopsis. Kevin narrowly avoids being run over by Bob's car. No, I think what's going to happen is Steve's going to cheat the shot by using a combination of under-cranking the camera and shooting low on a long lens. I see, said Tom, seemingly content with my answer. Phew. Now, the important thing here is that even though I had absolutely no idea how we were going to get this shot, well, safely at any rate, I did have the presence of mind to give a convincing answer involving techie terms such as under-cranking, shooting low, and long lens. Not being a cameraman, I had absolutely no idea if this would actually work, but it did seem to do the trick in allaying any fears that Tom may have had. I felt a bit bad for bullshitting him, but I couldn't exactly say, "Oh shit, we haven't thought about that, and even if we had, we couldn't afford a stuntman anyway, as we only have £1,000 in the contingency fund, and £250 of that has just been blown on denting the car with the the rabbit. I made my first mental note of the day. Make sure Tom doesn't get run over. I hope Steve had something up his sleeve on this one. It was an important opening shot in the film, and it had to look believable. But of course, at the same time, it was essential not to confuse believable with fatal. Having co-opted Tom into navigating, we made up some time, and soon we had a carload of actors and crew. Just one more stop to pick up George, and then we could head for the house where bacon rolls and steaming brews awaited us. I caught a glimpse of Danny in the rear-view mirror. Despite being cocooned in his North Face nuclear fallout survival suit, he still seemed to be shivering a bit. Having already enjoyed a bit of bonhomie with my other fellow travellers, I decided to give him some attention. "Did you get some decent kip, Danny?" I said. "Not really," mumbled Danny, reluctantly easing his fur-lined hood down a smidgen. "Oh, right, yeah. I struggled a bit too. Lots on my mind and all that. It wasn't my mind that was a problem. It was the bed and the lack of heat." "Right. Sorry to hear that, Danny," I commiserated. "I'll look into it." "Good. That would be appreciated," he said rather coldly. "Perhaps you could also look into sorting out the shower." What? Was I a fucking plumber now? "Okay," I assured him. "I'll have a word with the landlady." Freezing it was, he wittered on, unappeased by my reassurances. "Mine was all right," chipped in Toby, our sound recordist and fellow inmate of Maple Lodge B&B. "Nice and toasty it was," continued Toby. "You sure you adjusted the taps properly, mate?" "Yes," said Danny, marginally tilting his face in Toby's direction and speaking with slow, painful precision. "I'm a cinematographer, Toby. I think I have the skill set to work out the mechanics of a shower. Don't you?" Right. Danny was not a happy bunny this morning. That much was clearly apparent. But hey, speaking of unhappy bunnies, I was hardly sweetness and light after getting lost and praying in the car on Thumper. Danny may well have been exhibiting slightly unnerving Princess and the Pea tendencies, but I had to give him his due. The guy was an artist, a perfectionist, and a very important cog in the filmmaking machine. Anyway, I was convinced that all he needed was a warm bit of brekkie, and he'd be fine. Talking of which... "James, what about breakfast?" said Danny, still in mid-rant. There was nothing laid out on the kitchen table, and Mrs. Miggins, or whatever her name is, was nowhere to be seen. "I'm famished." "That's odd," interjected Toby. "She brought me breakfast in bed this morning. You know, the works. Eggs, bacon, sausages, mushrooms, tomatoes, beans." Toby smacked his lips with satisfaction. "Ooh, lovely it was." "Hang on a minute. That's not fair," protested Danny, gamely thrashing about on the end of Tom's hook. "How come you got preferential treatment?" he continued. "Oh, it was easy. I slipped her one," said Toby. "You what?" came Danny's shocked and aghast reply. "I shagged her. Gave her a good seeing to. Slipped her my sausage so she would give me hers. Nice and fat and crispy it was too. Her sausage, I mean, not my... Jesus!" Danny interrupted just in time. "What sort of an establishment are we sleeping in?" I thought it best to intervene before Danny combusted with indignation. "Toby's pulling your leg, Danny," I said, hoping to the dear Lord Jesus that this was indeed the case. "We're having breakfast as soon as we get to the location," I assured him. "Right. Very funny, Toby," said Danny, clearly unamused. "Still, James, something to eat first thing would be appreciated." Something told me that the words "would be appreciated" might turn out to be something of a theme when it came to our Danny. Still, I had every belief that with the rising of the dawn and the rolling of the camera, Danny would forget such trivia and, in the tradition of the true DOP alchemist, go on to fashion beautiful frames of movie magic out of the base raw materials of lights, lenses and memory cards. Anyway, that was the plan. But first we had to get some foodstuffs into that increasingly annoying gob of his. I pulled up the MPV into the driveway of the Turfwood Hotel and gave the horn a quick, discreet blast. It was now 7:45 a.m, which meant for those who had made their own way to the location, breakfast was already well underway. Having driven like a demon, I had made up a fair bit of lost time, but we were still 10 minutes away from the set, and George was nowhere to be seen. "Impressive gaff," acknowledged Toby, looking out at the handsome facade of the boutique hotel. "Yes, I bet the rooms are nice and cosy," added Danny, making no attempt to disguise his covetousness. "And no doubt replete with ensuite marble shower rooms and foot spas," he continued pointedly. I became aware that there was much craning of necks and a good few mutterings amongst my passengers. Needless to say, the actors were particularly interested in where George was staying. Granted, unbeknown to everyone else, George was paying half the hotel's cost, but that still meant I was forking out £75 a night for him, while the other actors and crew were confined to cheapest chips £25 a night jobbies. Even though George had a fairly crucial role to play in this film, he wasn't by any stretch of the imagination the film's star. What's more, everyone now gawping longingly at the hotel knew it. "So, party tonight at George's place then," said Sarah, one of our lead actresses. "Yeah, maybe I'll hook up with him during the shoot," added Jo, another actress. "I'll then be in a prime position to plunder his molten brown and curl up in his Egyptian cotton sheets," she sniggered. "Is he married, James?" "Yes, happily. 3 kids, or is it 4? I answered rather hastily, hoping to nip Jo's rather pragmatic and frankly whorish idea in the bud. I presumed she was joking, but I wasn't fully convinced. With no sign of George, I decided to go and get him. I entered the main door and approached an attractive and well-groomed receptionist. "Morning, I'm here to pick up George Bannister," I said. "Could you give him a buzz and let him know that I'm here?" "Oh, George, yes," she said, rather over-excitedly, in a thick Eastern European accent. "He already eat breakfast." "He's already had breakfast? So is he in his room now?" No. He already eat breakfast," she repeated while pointing towards a nearby doorway. "Oh, right, he's eating breakfast," I said, sailing dangerously close into Basil Fawlty-type waters. "Yes, of course," she replied with a frown. "You say you're here to pick him up? You his driver?" "Yes, that's right. Well, no, I'm not his own personal driver as such," I corrected myself, pointlessly worrying about my status. I'm working with George today on a film." "Yes, he tell me he big film star. You work for him long?" No. I don't work for him. I'm the producer." "Producer, I don't know this. It means you drive him to film set today?" That's right, I thought. I'd drive him, plait his beard, buff his cuticles, and balance things on my nose for his passing amusement. Oh, sounds like a fun job. No? Not so far this morning, no. I began to walk purposefully towards a pair of double doors. "So, dining room through here, is it?" I said. The dining room was empty of guests apart from George. He was reading a paper and surrounded by the remains of what looked like a not-so-petty déjeuner and a full English breakfast combo. "James, good morrow to you, old sport," said George, springing up and offering me his hand. "Morning, Georgia. Sorry I'm a bit late," I said, gazing longingly at a half-mauled pan of chocolat. I did wonder if this was all standard fare at the Turfwood, or if the remaining husk of my contingency fund would soon be consumed by George's insatiable appetite. "That's all right, old boy. No rush. Look, take a seat and have a cuppa. I'll get Anya to rustle us up another brew." George beckoned to a member of staff who had been hovering nearby. The girl, almost identical to the receptionist in looks, demeanour and Slavic descent, scurried over in an instant. Like the receptionist, it was fairly apparent that Anya was already a big George fan. Actually, George loved to, but we really do need to get to the location. The rest of the crew will already be there by now, and, we've got a fair bit to be getting on with today. "Oh, right." George seemed a bit put out by this. Perhaps he had momentarily forgotten that we were meant to be making a movie today. Perhaps, ensconced as he was in deepest, darkest Oxfordshire with his growing Slavic fan base to entertain and nourish him, he had assumed that he was actually on holiday. Tell you what, James, you carry on to the house and I'll see you there, all right? He said. Tell you what, George, I thought. You get your rapidly burgeoning arse into the MPV and we'll all arrive there together. Why? Because I'm not your chauffeur, I'm your boss. Okay, I'm a bit of a girly wuss of a boss that tends to kowtow when confronted with a large, pulsating ego, but this is still my show. I am still the fucking producer. So, move it. Makeup and wardrobe at 9 o'clock, right? George inquired, blissfully unaware of my inner grumblings. 8:30, I corrected somewhat meekly. Splendid! I'll see you later then, he beamed. Chapter 3. On arriving at the mansion house, our main location for the film, I had so nearly managed to sidle into the green room before Lucy had had a chance to target me. Tantalisingly, and but a few feet away, a hot, steaming breakfast was being rapidly devoured by cast and crew. So what happened to you? Said Lucy, brandishing a bacon roll and a production folder the size of Shropshire. Oh, slept through my alarm, got lost, collided with a rabbit, stuff like that, I answered, salivating with lust at the sight of the roll. Any chance of a cuppa? I added wistfully. Well, don't look at me, came Lucy's curt reply. Ask the runner. We have a runner? I said, momentarily very excited. When did we get a runner? He came free with my morning cereal, Lucy said with a sardonic grimace. I sourced one a couple of days ago, James. Thought it might come in useful to the production team. Great, and then there were 3, I said. Well, more like 2 and a bit, don't you think? Who's the bit, then? Well, that'll be you, James. Don't forget your other co-starring roles as first and third assistant director, a second policeman, unit driver, location manager, blah, 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 blah. Oh, don't worry about all those other things, I said, attempting to dismiss Lucy's fears that we were indeed hideously under-resourced. I'm sure once the crew get going, I can duck out of a few responsibilities. Right, well, we'll see, shall we? Said Lucy, unconvinced. Anyway, the runner's name is Andy, and don't worry, he's very cheap and reliable. A bit like me, really. Well, that's great news, I said. The word cheap was a comfort, though any fresh assault on my contingency fund was bound to be a concern. Maybe Andy can also assume the role of third assistant director and also be unit driver. I could tell that Lucy wasn't particularly enamoured of this suggestion by the way she sighed, stared heavenward and mouthed a silent prayer. He's cheap because he's inexperienced, James. We can't just throw him into the role of third AD on his first ever day on a film set. Well, why not? This is my first day on set as a feature film producer. Don't remind me, she muttered. Through the green room door, I caught a glimpse of Toby constructing the mother of all breakfast rolls out of bacon, sausage and scrambled eggs. Bastard. I bet he was already on to seconds. Look, Andy will be fine as a third AD, I said, hoping to bring the curtain down on this issue and get some sustenance. Anyway, we don't have a lot of choice really, do we? And we do need someone to make sure the actors get on set. OK, but he only works in production. I don't want him being absorbed into the crew, said Lucy. Sure. His arse is ours, I reassured her. Oh, can you also see if he's up for doing the cast and crew pickups in the morning? I could really do with losing that particular role. Sorry, James, he's only 22, so I don't think you'll get him on the insurance. No. Balls. Nice thought, but it looked as if my driving duties would remain albatross-like around my neck for the foreseeable. Right, I'm just going to go and grab a bite, I said, aware that my blood sugar level had crept dangerously close to DEFCON 1. OK, but you've got an HOD meeting in... Lucy gave her wrist an exaggerated twist as she checked her watch. 5 minutes precisely. Sure, I said, before striding off towards the green room. I was within sniffing distance of crispy bacon when a nagging thought spun me around and deposited me back in front of Lucy. A what meeting? I asked. HOD, said Lucy, tucking into the last bit of her roll. Don't ask me what it stands for, but obviously it's important because Danny got me to schedule it. Right, I said, slightly miffed. I really, really needed something to eat. A donut about the size of Lucy's head would do it. But isn't that my job to call meetings? I said. Well, I gather from Danny that an HOD meeting is fairly standard at this point. Yes, but I don't want to have an HOD meeting, I protested. Is that because you don't know what it is? Lucy said, a bit too gleefully for my liking. No. All right. Yes, I have no idea what an HOD meeting is, but that's not the point, Lucy. It's not up to Danny to schedule meetings, I continued rather testily. That's my job as producer. All right, James, keep your hair on. Danny's only trying to help. Yes. Okay, fine, I said, backing down and realising that lack of food was making me very, very tetchy. We needed to trust Danny, and if he were desirous of a meeting, then I was, at this early stage of the shoot, willing to indulge him. Look, I'll quickly grab some breakfast and then let's whiz through this HOD thingy, I said. A few minutes and a hastily consumed egg and bacon butty later, and Steve, Danny, Toby, Diane, the continuity lady, and myself were tucked away in the library for our first inaugural HOD meeting. It had been quite tricky to get Steve to the meeting as he, like me, had no idea what HOD stood for, and with the sun now up, was anxious to get out and start filming. "Shall we get on with it then?" said Steve, peering longingly out of the window across the parkland. "We're still missing a couple of heads of department," replied Danny. "Oh, right. So that's what HOD stands for. Heads of Department," declared Steve, rather too loudly. I, on the other hand, decided to greet this revelation with suitable insouciance, followed by a knowing look in Danny's direction along the lines of, "Directors, eh? What are they like?" Unfortunately, Steve managed to ruin my little act by giving me a broad smile and saying, "There you go, James. Mystery solved. And another acronym you can use with confidence." "Right, so who are we missing then?" I said, attempting to slide out of the spotlight. I glanced at my watch. It was already 9 a.m, and according to the schedule, we were meant to be out on a country road somewhere, ready and rehearsed for the first shot at 9:15. "Well, lighting, props, wardrobe, and not forgetting our stunt coordinator for Scene 3, said Danny. I looked across at Steve, hoping that the mention of Scene 3 and a stunt man would elicit some sort of response along the lines of, "Actually, Danny, no need for a stuntman because I'm going to cheat the shot by a combination of undercranking the camera and shooting low on a long lens." Instead, what actually tumbled out of Steve's mouth was, "Danny, there's no need for a stuntman because I'm sure the actor can just jump out of the way of the car." Danny looked incredulously at Steve for a good 10 seconds before responding. "Right, so we don't have a stunt coordinator or a stuntman." No need," said Steve. Danny turned slowly to face me. "I have to say, James, I'm really not happy about this. It's a total disregard for health and safety." Sure, totally understand, Danny," I said, reinforcing my understanding by doodling a German tiger tank onto my call sheet. "Don't worry, Danny, it'll be fine," Steve said with an amiable grin. "Speaking of which, any chance we could continue this HOD meeting while we're making our way towards the first camera setup?" "Well, no, not really. Mainly because we haven't established yet where the first setup is going to be," said Danny, giving the call sheet a disdainful glance. "I mean, look, the script breakdown, it just says, exterior, Bob and Paula drive down country lane. But I haven't yet been shown the location or any shooting options." Shooting options, Steve repeated, mantra-like to himself. "Well, as far as I know, our main shooting option is to shoot the car driving along the country lane with our two actors in it." Danny took a moment to absorb this latest example of Steve's loose, gung-ho approach to filmmaking. He then turned to address me in the hope that I might possess some more pertinent information on the subject. "James, have you looked at where we're going to shoot this?" Yes, sort of," I said. "So, is this road running north-south? East-west? What?" snapped Danny. "It would be really useful at this point to know where the sun is in relation to the shot." Right, of course," I replied in full-thrust mollifying mode. "Well, it runs alongside the park over there," I said, waving a finger in the approximate direction of where I thought the road might lie. Truth was, In my role of location manager, I hadn't exactly pinned down where we might shoot this first scene, as it really hadn't occurred to me there was that much of a big deal which road we used. Surely a country road was a country road. Danny looked out of the window in the direction I had vaguely pointed and scribbled down a note. I looked at Steve and pulled a face. Steve shrugged and looked pointedly at his watch. Toby began to snore loudly. I decided it was time for me to fully embrace my producer mantle and take charge. The HOD meeting was now officially over. Right, well, let's crack on, I said, snapping shut my production folder and getting to my feet. Thank fuck for that, said Steve. Half an hour later, and our little shoot convoy was finally pulling out from the house and heading towards the first camera setup. Why it had taken so long to get our movie-making shit together was beyond me. There were only a dozen of us heading out with just some basic kit, but for some reason, rounding up everyone had proved to be ridiculously complicated. I was beginning to feel like I was a teacher in charge of a bunch of school children on some ill-fated field trip. As soon as I thought we had got everyone together by the vehicles, then someone would wander off back into the house. This would inevitably mean that I would dispatch Andy, our new runner and trainee third assistant director, to go and fetch this particular miscreant back, only for Andy himself to get hopelessly lost in the labyrinthine warren of the building. On reflection, I should have just tied a bit of string to his foot or given him a big tub of breadcrumbs to drop behind him. I made a mental note that the next time I made a film, I would have everyone injected with a location chip. Bit costly maybe in terms of an initial outlay, but it would probably save me a lot of grief and precious shooting time in the long run. Within only a couple of minutes of leaving the main driveway, I turned onto the country road that ran alongside one edge of the estate. So, Danny, this is the road I had in mind for the first shot. Danny, who was riding shotgun beside me, instantly sat up and peered ahead with the intensity of a beagle on the lookout for some sort of golden mythical fox. Okay, can you slow down a bit, said Danny, his nostrils flaring. I got the impression that the wild had come a-calling and that Danny had picked up on some irresistible scent. It seemed strange to think that we were somehow going to let Danny smell his way to our first camera setup. See anything you fancy? Asked Steve, with a mixture of mounting impatience and well-aimed flippancy. Not quite yet, no. Let's keep going, replied Danny. And so we did keep going, at about 10 miles an hour with our 3 other vehicles in tow, as well as a growing slow-moving column of local traffic. Danny, we're going to have to let this lot pass us soon, I said, keen not to antagonise the local populace on this our first shoot day. And we're also slipping a bit behind on the schedule, Danny. Exactly 1 hour behind, to be precise, and still no sign of that elusive first camera setup. All right, don't rush me. I think there might be something interesting coming up, said Danny, leaning forward and focusing on something in the distance. I followed Danny's eye line, but failed to see anything more than yet another bit of meandering country road. To be fair, I didn't claim to have the finely tuned eye of a cinematographer, so I kept my sceptical thoughts to myself. Steve, on the other hand, had had enough. This looks like a nice bit of tarmac and verge, said Steve. So let's stop here, shall we, James? You okay with that, Danny? I said. What, just here? Said Danny, consumed with doubt. Yes, just here, said Steve, determined to curtail the hunt for the perfect first shot. Look, there's even somewhere to park the cars. It's a sign. Thus directed, I immediately turned off the road onto a narrow track that led up to some farm buildings. As soon as we parked up, Steve sprang out of the door and quickly trotted off to recce the shot, with Danny and Toby following in his wake. The rest of the crew and actors slowly disembarked from the vehicles and gathered in a little huddle around me. It was only then that I realised that George was absent. Kate, did George turn up for makeup this morning? George, she pondered. He's playing Bob, right? Well, yes, in theory, at any rate. No, I haven't seen him this morning. But wasn't he down on your call sheet for today? Well, yes, but I presumed you'd changed things around at the last minute, she said. I pictured George back at the hotel, surrounded by a bevy of naked East European waitresses and puffing on a large post-coital cigar. It wasn't an image I was particularly happy with. I took out my mobile and called Lucy back at the house. Lucy, is George there? What was... say again, you're breaking up, came Lucy's strangled reply. I said, is George there? James, your note is bad. Can't hear what... ink. I checked my phone. No, the signal was weak, but there were definitely a couple of bars there. The problem must have been at Lucy's end. Lucy, move over to the window. You've got a really bad signal, I said. I am by fucking dough. The problem's at N, came Lucy's mangled and deeply aggravated reply. No, Lucy, I've got coverage. It must be you, I said self-righteously. A slanging match of epic proportions about who had the weakest coverage may well have ensued, had I not looked down at my phone and noticed that my 2 bars had been reduced to a feeble, flickering 1. Hang on, Lucy, I squealed, while holding the phone at arm's length above my head. A single full bar appeared on my phone. Can you hear me now? I shouted, while fumbling to find the loudspeaker function. Just about, came the faint strains of Lucy. What is it you want? But before I could answer, I was confronted by a tall, burly, red-faced figure with what looked like a large fuck-off shotgun slung over his shoulder. You can't park your vehicles here, I'm afraid, said the stranger in the calm, collected tones of someone comfortable in the knowledge that he is packing a weapon of mass rural destruction. Hang on, Lucy, I called up towards the end of my outstretched arm. I turned to address the gun-toting, red-faced one. Hi there, I said, offering my free hand while still keeping my mobile aloft with the other. We're just doing a bit of filming and I was wondering if we could park our vehicles here for a little while. The red-faced one ignored my outstretched hand and instead slowly turned to examine more closely our filmmaking ensemble. Under such scrutiny, an insane thought entered my mind that he might actually be selecting one of them for that evening's roast dinner. Filming, you say, he said, slipping the gun off his shoulder and breaking it open. Yes, that's right. We're making a feature film. Feature film, you say, he said, stroking his stubbled chin. Yes, that's right, I said. I'm the producer, and these are my crew and actors. The producer, you say? Yes. So, you're the one who holds the purse strings, then? Yes, amongst a lot of other things, I said, while looking up towards my mobile phone and wondering if Lucy was still there. The red-faced one casually blew down the open barrels of the gun and then reached into his pocket and took out a couple of cartridges. No doubt nothing of significance was meant by this, but it still managed to put the fear of God up me during one of his particularly wrathful and smiting phases, and I let out a faint whimpering noise. You all right? He said, snapping his shotgun back into primed and ready-to-maim mode. Yes, fine, thanks, I said. What's with your arm, then? Oh, I'm just struggling to get a bit of phone coverage. Yes, well, you would around here. This is the countryside, you know. Things are very different out here. Yes, so I've noticed, I said, suppressing a desire to tell him that, yes, they are different, but not in a quaint and endearing oldie-worldy Miss Marpley way, but more in a fucking irritating, nothing quite works properly kind of way. Bollocks to this, came the distant voice of Lucy. Call me when you got proper reception. I lowered my arm and pocketed the phone, thankful for the sweet sensation of blood returning to my numb hand. Anyway, do you want to do some business regarding your parking arrangements for today? The farmer inquired, with a big, rosy-cheeked H.E. Bates, Thomas Hardy, Mill on the Floss, stupid bastard grin. Well, considering you've asked so nicely and you're brandishing a loaded shotgun, yes, why not? I thought. Sure, I said. Shall we swap numbers and come to an agreement later today? Only I'm a bit pushed for time at the moment. Cash would do it, he said, while repeatedly flicking the gun's safety catch on and off. How about £100? Yes, £100 sounded like a very reasonable sum to park 3 cars in the middle of nowhere for just a couple of hours. Perhaps he'd also like to have a go on our comely make-up girl while he was at it. I guessed it was my own fault for telling him that we were making a feature film. He must have thought I was a veritable walking piggy bank with my producer pockets stuffed with wads of cash. In reality, I had a £20 note. For a brief moment I considered the prospect of finding another location for the vehicles. However, that could easily translate into a lot of hassle and hauling of heavy kit across ploughed fields, which would also have meant the loss of more precious time. We were slipping inexorably behind on the schedule, and the only thing even close to being shot was us, by him, the jolly extortionist farmer. "How about £20 now and 80 this afternoon?" I suggested. "I think £100 now would be better," he said, sliding a calloused and sun-parched hand down the barrel of the gun. "Right. Problem is, I've only got £20 on me," I said. "Really?" He was obviously unmoved by my cash flow dilemma. "Guess that means you lot are going to have to move your vehicles then." It was at this moment that the other shooting party returned. "Right, let's get the camera and get this shot," said Steve, moving swiftly towards the MPV. "I'm still not sure about those houses in the background. I think it could jeopardise my framing," complained Danny, with that utterly not convinced look that I would, in the coming weeks, grow to know and truly hate. "It'll be fine," said Steve, swinging open the back of the MPV and grabbing a camera case. "Come on, let's get on with it." Danny's demeanour turned a shade darker as he paused to dwell on Steve's brusque dismissal. This was very much the phony war, or what might be called the niggling the shit out of each other phase of their relationship. Little did either Steve or I realise on this first day of the shoot that Danny was secretly mustering a vast army that would soon be unleashed, blitzkrieg style, on our poorly equipped defences. For the time being, however, Danny kept his incursions across the border to a minimum, but still, just enough to test the strength of our resolve and see where we were weakest. "Do you want me to go and burn them down for you?" offered Toby. "What?" said Danny. "The houses. If they're screwing up your shot," continued Toby cheerily. "I could easily torch them for you. Wouldn't take a jiffy." Danny glared at Toby before sulkily walking over to the MPV to help unload kit. Meanwhile, I had some more pressing concerns to deal with, like finding some cash and an AWOL actor. The farmer was getting twitchy, and I didn't want a twitchy farmer with a twitchy finger anywhere near that shotgun trigger. "Has anyone got any money on them?" I asked. I've got £20, said Tom. "Great. Can I borrow it, Tom? Just for today?" "Sure. No problem, James," said Tom with a big, warm, lovable smile. Again, what a lovely man Tom was, and how impressed he must have been to find himself subbing the film so early on in the shoot. It made me feel about 3mm high. Never mind, needs must. Anyone else? I just need another 60. Eventually, after much awkward pleading, the full 100 was raised and the farmer duly satisfied. "Just for a couple of hours, mind," he said, stuffing the cash into his pocket. "And don't go blocking the driveway or leave any litter. Oh, and don't worry the sheep." Ho-hum. One problem solved, but yet another chunk of my contingency fund merrily flushed away. And it was only day one. And still the camera was yet to turn. "You might want to get our actors ready for the shot, James," said Steve. "Shouldn't take too long to set this one up." Sure, I replied, wondering if Steve had actually noticed that George was nowhere to be seen. One person who was very aware of his absence was our continuity lady, Diane. "So is George on his way then, James?" she asked calmly. "I'm just on it, Diane," I replied, while simultaneously reaching up to the stars in the hope that the cosmos might bless me with some decent fucking phone coverage for a change. Diane had been highly recommended by Steve for the job of continuity supervisor on the basis that she seemed to have single-handedly saved his bacon on his first feature film. How? I wasn't sure. As far as I knew, continuity was making sure that the actor was wearing the same tie throughout a particular scene. Beyond that, I really didn't know what other purpose they fulfilled. One thing was for sure, however. At this stage of the game, she intimidated the fuck out of me. For starters, there was the fact that Diane was unnervingly well-equipped. She had different coloured pens, a large, robust folder, bespoke daily continuity report sheets, which didn't look anything like the ones I'd seen in my Fun with Filmmaking colouring book, She also had a Polaroid camera and a special version of the script with lots of mysterious Da Vinci Code style symbols and abbreviations all over it. Everything about Diane smacked of seasoned professional, right down to her utilitarian outdoor clothes, which, unlike my shiny but cheap BHS winter selection outfit, actually looked as if they had been designed to prevent, rather than actively encourage, hypothermia. Then there was the fact that in a previous telephone conversation with her, I had ended up making a right tit out of myself. Hi Diane, I know Steve's already spoken to you, but I just thought I'd give you a quick call to see if you're all set for the shoot. Yes, James, looking forward to it. Great. Oh, just one thing, James. Who's first AD on this? Slight pause as the mention of first AD stirred a faint, obscure recollection of something I had once sleepily glossed over during my filmmaking research phase. Right, good point, Diane. I'm not sure at the moment, to be honest, but I do have one or two people in mind. It was a lie, of course, and I was suddenly and horribly made aware that something crucial might be missing from my hastily assembled team. Okay, I see. Only, James, I presume you need to get someone on board fairly soon for script breakdown and scheduling purposes. Yes, of course, Diane, I said, while surreptitiously tapping the words First Assistant Director into a search engine. I mean, James, you've only got 4 weeks before principal photography, Diane interjected, sounding a bit too worried and motherly for my liking. Yes, I'm aware of that, Diane, I said with growing annoyance. Geez, what was the big deal with having a first AD? I mean, I would be there on set to lend a hand, and besides, the budget really didn't stretch to having yet more crew. I could suggest a couple of good firsts, if you like, Diane continued to prompt. No need, Diane. No, really, everything's in hand. Basically, please just let me fuck this up on my own, all right? Meanwhile, Google had directed me to quite an alarming link. Apparently, the first AD was meant to work closely in conjunction with the director weeks before shooting to produce a shot-by-shot storyboard, shoot order, scene scheduling thingy, and lots of other stuff that hadn't been taken care of up to that point. I decided to stop reading and instead plunged my head deep into some nice warm sand. You've got to be careful when you conjure up the spirit of Google. It quite often gives you the sort of information that you'd really rather not know. For example, I once got a strange small lump in my throat, and as an ex-smoker and platinum-grade hypochondriac, I made the mistake of Googling lump and throat. Huge mistake. After only a couple of minutes of research, I had concluded that death by horribly painful neck cancer was imminent, and there was only one thing for it but to top myself. I therefore duly tapped in the words "assisted suicide ASAP" into the search engine. Fortunately, the online application form for the euthanasia clinic that I had opted for was so complicated and tedious that I soon lost interest in the whole idea, and instead found myself distracted by the Czech Sapphic Lesbo hot girls do it doggy with sex toys while you watch site. Still, I learnt the following very important lesson from all this. Research is often a scary and frightening thing, and it is often much better to remain pig ignorant and immerse yourself in porn. Diane, any chance that you could be first AD, and as well as doing the continuity stuff? It was a long shot, but I thought it might just get me off the hook. There was a long pause as Diane attempted to compute my bizarre request. Well, bizarre, at least from her and any other professional filmmaker's point of view. From my pragmatic and insanely naive point of view, however, it all made a ton of sense. I couldn't see why she couldn't occasionally help Steve lift the camera into position, if that was the sort of thing a first AD did, while at the same time making sure that the lead actor's tie was all neat and tidy. This, after all, was guerrilla filmmaking. Mucking in and multitasking was the order of the day. Come on, Diane, I thought, get with the programme. Well, James, many thanks for the offer, but that's not really what I do. No, you adjust ties and straighten cushions. Not bad for the money I'm forking out for your services. Continuity and first AD are two completely different jobs, she continued. You really do need both roles filled, James. Right, so you think I ought to get a first AD then? I said, not realising that in asking Diane to be first AD as well as continuity was a bit like asking a top chef to run the kitchen while also simultaneously acting as maitre d'. It just wasn't done. Well, to be honest, James, it's, well, how can I put this? It's kind of standard practice, really, when making a feature film to have an experienced first assistant director. I've never actually worked on a film without one. If you don't have someone in charge on set, well, I imagine it would be like going into battle without a commander. And thus it came to pass that with the deft use of a military analogy, something that I could clearly understand, the penny dropped, the heralds sang out, the day was bathed in a bright and dazzling dawn, and ultimately I ended up feeling like a right tit. As soon as I'd finished speaking to Diane, I thought very seriously about getting a first assistant director. Honest. Unfortunately, 2 minutes into my pondering, a friend popped round unannounced for tea, and the whole issue got filed in my important things to ignore file. And that was that. By the time of the shooting, I just told everyone that it was I who would be undertaking this role. Lucy, for one, was particularly over the moon about this decision. I knew she was happy about it because she used the phrase "fucking great" more than once in reference to it. Having given up on trying to contact Lucy by phone, I decided to head back to the house to see if I could find the wayward George. It had momentarily crossed my mind to ask Andy to do this, but due to his tender years, he wasn't insured to drive anything bigger than a Hoover. Anyway, after losing him in the bowels of the house earlier, I doubted he'd find his way back to us again. Before I left, though, I did tell Andy to explain to Steve why I had gone and that, in my absence, he was to act as a second first AD. Andy greeted this news with the sort of expression that a newborn kitten exhibits just before being drowned in a bucket. Okay, so what does a second first AD do? Andy asked, his voice wavering somewhat fearfully. Much the same as the first AD, I answered, as I edged the car away from him and towards the main road. Right, and what does a first AD do? He continued, trotting behind the car like a lost puppy abandoned at the roadside, and having just seen his best buddy, the kitten, being drowned. Fuck knows, I said, as I found second and zoomed off.